The day the letter arrived changed everything for Mike. It came in a weathered envelope with no return address, just his name scrawled across the front in handwriting he recognized instantly. His grandfather's handwriting. The thing was, his grandfather had been dead for 3 months. Mike stood in his kitchen, coffee growing cold on the counter as he turned the envelope over in his hands. The paper felt old, like it had been waiting somewhere for a long time before finding its way to his mailbox. A chill ran down his spine despite the warm spring air drifting through the open window. "This is weird," he muttered to himself. Finally, tearing open the seal. Inside was a faded photograph and a small note card. The photo showed his grandfather as a young man, maybe in his 20s, standing beside a woman Mike had never seen before. They were smiling, his grandfather's arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. Both wore clothes from another time, his grandfather in high-waisted pants and a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, the woman in a simple floral dress that reached just below her knees. Mike flipped the photo over. Written. In faded blue ink were the words, "Remember Our Promise, 1952. His hands trembled slightly as he read the note card. "The truth lies beneath. Find it before they do." Mike sank into a kitchen chair, staring at the items. His grandfather, Robert, had been a quiet, reserved man who rarely spoke about his past. Mike had known him as the guy who taught him to fish, who built birdhouses in his workshop, who always smelled like pipe tobacco and mint. Not as someone with secrets, not as someone who'd leave cryptic messages from beyond the grave. "What promise?" Mike whispered to the empty kitchen. "And who is she?" According to family stories, his grandmother Helen had been Robert's only love. They'd met in 1955 and married 6 months later. But this photo was dated 1952, 3 years before they supposedly met. And the woman standing beside his grandfather definitely wasn't Helen. The doorbell rang, startling Mike from his thoughts. He quickly tucked the photo and note into his pocket before answering the door. "Hey, brought that book I promised you," said his cousin Pete, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He noticed Mike's expression and frowned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Mike almost laughed. "Not exactly, but close." He hesitated, then pulled out the photo. "This came in the mail today." Grandpa's handwriting. Pete's eyebrows shot up as he studied the picture. "Weird. Who's the woman?" "No idea, but look at the date," Pete whistled low. 1952? That's before Grandma, right?" "Yeah. And there's this too." Mike showed him the note. Pete read it twice, his forehead creasing. "The truth lies beneath? That's kind of creepy, honestly. Tell me about it." Mike took back the items. "I'm going to ask Mom about it." "Good luck with that," Pete snorted. "You know how they all clam up whenever anyone asks about Grandpa's life before Grandma?" It was true. Mike had noticed it even as a kid. The way conversations would shift whenever certain topics came up. The meaningful glances exchanged between his mother and her siblings. He'd always chalked it up to boring adult stuff, but now he wondered if there was more to it. That evening, Mike drove to his mother's house for their weekly dinner. Throughout the meal, he kept the photo burning a hole in his pocket, waiting for the right moment. Finally, as his mom served coffee, he placed the photo on the table. "This came in the mail today," he said, watching her face carefully. Grandpa's writing on the back. His mother's reaction was immediate and alarming. The color drained from her face. The coffee pot slipped from her hand, clattering onto the table and spilling dark liquid across the wood. She didn't seem to notice. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Like I said, it came in the mail. Anonymous envelope." Mike dabbed at the coffee with a napkin. "Who is she, Mom?" "The woman with Grandpa." His mother snatched up the photo, staring at it like it might bite her. This is nothing you need to worry about, just an old picture." She tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "Probably someone from the old neighborhood." "Mom, it's dated 1952, 3 years before he met Grandma. And he wrote, 'Remember our promise.'" Plus, there was this note. He showed her the card. She read it, and if possible, grew even paler. This is nonsense. Your grandfather was... He was a good man, a simple man. He didn't have any secrets. I never said he did. Mike studied her. But you're acting like he did. His mother stood abruptly, taking the photo and note with her. I think you should go, Mike. I'm feeling tired suddenly. Mom, come on. Please. Her voice cracked. Just leave it alone. Some things are better left in the past. Mike left his mother's house more confused than ever, and without the photo or note. He drove aimlessly for a while, trying to make sense of her reaction. It was nearly 9 o'clock when he found himself pulling into the parking lot of Sunny Pines Nursing Home. His great-aunt Dot lived there. At 92, she was the oldest living member of the family and his grandfather's sister. If anyone knew about his grandfather's past, it would be her. The problem was, Dot's mind wasn't what it used to be. Some days she was sharp as a tack. Other days she didn't recognize her own children. The night nurse, Becky, smiled when she saw Mike. Little late for a visit, isn't it? I know. Is she still up? Actually, yes. Having one of her good days, too. She's in the common room watching her game shows. Mike found Aunt Dot exactly where Becky had said, perched in her wheelchair in front of the television, shouting answers at the screen. Her thin white hair was neatly combed, and she wore a cardigan despite the warm evening. Idiots, she was muttering. The answer is Mount Rushmore, you nitwit. Hey, Aunt Dot, Mike said, pulling up a chair beside her. She turned, her faded blue eyes lighting up. Well, look what the cat dragged in. My favorite great-nephew. I'm your only great-nephew, Mike laughed. Details, details. She patted his hand. What brings you here so late? Someone die? No, nothing like that. Mike hesitated. Actually, I wanted to ask you about Grandpa, about his life before he met Grandma. Dot's smile faded slightly. Bobby? What about him? Mike described the photo and note, watching her reaction carefully. Unlike his mother, Dot didn't seem shocked, more resigned. So it's finally coming out. She sighed. I wondered if it ever would. Mike's heart raced. What is? What's coming out? Dot glanced around the room, then leaned closer. Bobby wasn't always the man you knew, Mike. Before Helen, before your mother, there was a different life. The woman in the photo? Dot nodded slowly. Her name was Lily. Lily Chen. Pretty little thing, smart as a whip. Bobby was crazy about her. Were they married? No. Not officially, anyway. It wouldn't have been... Well, things were different back then. A white man and a Chinese woman. People talked, but they had their own kind of ceremony, exchanged promises. She tapped, her finger against her lips. The diamonds were part of that promise. Mike frowned. Diamonds? Dot's eyes suddenly widened and she clutched Mike's wrist with surprising strength. Bobby? Is that you, Bobby? Her voice had changed, higher and confused. No, Aunt Dot, it's Mike, your nephew. But Dot wasn't seeing him anymore. She was looking through him back into the past. Did you find the box, Bobby? Are the diamonds safe? You promised me you'd keep them hidden after what happened to Lily. A nurse appeared at Mike's shoulder. Everything okay over here? Mike nodded, though his mind was reeling. She's just confused. It happens, especially in the evenings. The nurse checked her watch. It's almost medication time anyway. You might want to wrap up your visit. By the time Mike said his goodbyes, Dot had retreated completely into confusion, calling him by his grandfather's name and asking about people he'd never heard of. He left the nursing home with more questions than answers, and one word echoing in his mind, diamonds. That night, Mike couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, his mind racing with fragments of information. His grandfather's face in the photograph, young and carefree in a way Mike had never seen him. The woman, Lily, smiling beside him. His mother's fear. Aunt Dot's slip about diamonds and a box. Around 3 in the morning, he gave up on sleep and opened his laptop. If he couldn't get straight answers from his family, maybe he could find them elsewhere. He typed his grandfather's name into the search bar, adding 1952 and the town where he'd grown up. What he found made his blood run cold. A newspaper article dated July 1952 reported a major jewelry heist at Watson's Fine Jewelry. The thief had made off with nearly $500,000 worth of diamonds. The primary suspect was a young apprentice jeweler who had disappeared the same night. The apprentice's name was Robert Miller, his grandfather's name before he changed it to Wilson when he married Mike's grandmother. Mike stared at the screen until his eyes burned. The kind, gentle grandfather who had taught him to fish and build birdhouses had once been a thief. It seemed impossible, and yet... "The truth lies beneath," Mike whispered, finally understanding what he had to do. Find it before they do. He closed his laptop and looked out the window at the night sky. Somewhere out there were answers about his grandfather, about Lily, about the diamonds, and they were waiting for him beneath the earth, in the last place anyone would think to look, his grandfather's grave. Mike barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his grandfather's face. Not the wrinkled, gentle face he remembered from childhood, but the young man from the photograph, standing beside a woman named Lily with diamonds and secrets between them. By morning, Mike had made up his mind. He called in sick to work and drove to the local library. If the internet had revealed one piece of his grandfather's past, maybe old newspapers and town records would show more. The library was nearly empty on a Tuesday morning. An elderly librarian looked up from her desk and smiled as Mike entered. "Can I help you find something?" "I'm researching local history," Mike said. "Specifically around 1952. Do you have newspapers from that time?" "Microfilm in the back room," she said, pointing, "and some digitized archives on the computers. Anything specific you're looking for?" Mike hesitated. "Information about a jewelry heist at Watson's Fine Jewelry." The librarian's eyebrows shot up. "Well, that's specific indeed. The Watson robbery was quite the scandal back then. My mother used to talk about it." Mike felt his pulse quicken. "Your mother knew about it?" "Everyone did. Small town like this, big news travels fast and stays in people's memories." She leaned forward. "Why the interest?" "Family history project," Mike said vaguely. In the microfilm room, Mike scrolled through months of local newspapers from 1952. The jewelry heist had made front-page news for weeks. Details emerged that hadn't been in the brief online article he'd found. The apprentice jeweler, his grandfather, had worked at Watson's for nearly 2 years, gaining the owner's trust. The night of the theft, he'd stayed late to finish a special order. The next morning, both he and a collection of uncut diamonds were gone. What shocked Mike most was a grainy photograph accompanying one of the articles. It showed the interior of the jewelry store, with police examining the broken display cases. In the background, barely noticeable, was a bulletin board with employee photos. Though blurry, Mike could make out his grandfather's young face and beside him a woman who looked remarkably like the one from the photograph that had arrived in Mike's mail. "Lily," he whispered to himself. He printed several articles and continued, searching, this time extending his search through the following months. In September 1952, nearly 2 months after the robbery, he found something disturbing. The headline read, "Unidentified woman's body found outside town limits." Mike's hands shook as he read the short article. A young woman's body had been discovered in the woods by a hunter. She had no identification and no one had come forward to claim her. The article mentioned she appeared to be of Oriental descent, and the police were investigating but had few leads. There was no follow-up article in the next day's paper or the day after. It was as if the story of the unknown woman had simply vanished like Lily herself. Mike printed the article and sat back in his chair trying to make sense of it all. Had his grandfather been involved in the woman's death? It seemed impossible. The kind man who had taught Mike to fish and build birdhouses couldn't have been a thief, let alone a killer. Yet the timeline fit. The jewelry heist in July. The woman's body found in September. And according to family history, his grandfather had appeared in a different state under a new name by October, where he would eventually meet Mike's grandmother. Mike drove from the library to the county records office. He needed to know more about his grandfather's movements during that crucial time. The clerk at the records office was less helpful than the librarian. "Most of those records aren't digitized," he said with a bored expression. "You'll need to fill out these forms and wait for retrieval. Could take a few days." "I don't have a few days," Mike said. "This is important." The clerk shrugged. "Everything's important to someone." Mike filled out the forms anyway, requesting any records related to Robert Miller from 1950 to 1953. As he was about to leave, he had a thought. "What about cemetery records? Would those be here or somewhere else?" The clerk pointed to a door across the hall. "Historical Society handles those. Mrs. Winters might be able to help if she's in today." Mrs. Winters was in, and unlike the records clerk, she found Mike's quest fascinating. A small woman with thick glasses and a cardigan despite the warm weather. She pulled out several large books of cemetery records when Mike explained he was researching his family history. "Which cemetery are you interested in?" she asked. "Hillside," Mike said. That's where his grandfather had been buried 3 months ago, in the family plot he'd purchased decades earlier. Mrs. Winters nodded and pulled out a different book. "Hillside's records go back to its founding in 1878. What time period are you looking at?" "Recent, actually. My grandfather was buried there in February, but I'm curious about when he purchased the plot. It would have been years ago." She ran her finger down a page of more recent records. "Name, Robert Wilson." Her finger stopped moving. "Here we are. Robert Wilson purchased a family plot in 1993. 4 spaces." She adjusted her glasses. "Oh, there's a note here. Special instructions, for his own burial." Mike leaned forward. "What kind of instructions?" "Unusual ones." She turned the book so Mike could see. He requested a deeper-than-standard grave, with a concrete barrier at the 6-foot level. The casket was to be placed below this barrier, very specific dimensions too. She looked up at Mike. "People sometimes have unusual requests, but this is one of the stranger ones I've seen." Mike stared at the page. His grandfather had essentially created a hidden chamber within his grave, a secret space that would remain undisturbed when he was buried. "The truth lies beneath," he murmured. "Pardon?" Mrs. Winters asked. "Nothing. Thank you for your help." On his way home, Mike stopped at a small diner for lunch. His appetite was gone, but he needed time to think. He spread the newspaper articles on the table beside his untouched sandwich. The jewelry heist, the missing diamonds, Lily, who might have been the unidentified woman found in the woods, his grandfather's hidden past and the secret space in his grave. It was all connected, but how Mike's phone rang, startling him. It was his mother. "I need the photo back," she said without preamble. "The one you showed me yesterday." "I don't have it," Mike said. "You kept it, remember?" There was a pause. "It's not here. I thought maybe you had taken it back somehow." "Why would I do that?" "I don't know, Mike." His mother's voice rose with an edge of panic. "But it's gone, and so is the note. And someone called the house last night, asking about your grandfather's things." Mike sat up straighter. What did they want to know? If we'd found anything unusual among his possessions. "They claimed to be an old friend, but your grandfather didn't have old friends, not from before." She trailed off. "Before what, Mom?" "Nothing. Just be careful, Mike. Don't go digging into things you don't understand." After they hung up, Mike sat for a long time thinking. Someone else was looking for whatever his grandfather had hidden. Someone who knew about the diamonds, about Lily, about the secret buried with his grandfather. He paid for his uneaten lunch and drove to the cemetery. He needed to see the grave again, to look at it with fresh eyes. Hillside Cemetery was peaceful in the afternoon sun. Birds sang in the old oak trees that lined the winding paths. Mike made his way to the family plot, where his grandparents now lay side by side. His grandmother had died 5 years earlier, His grandfather had visited her grave every Sunday until his own death. Had she known about his past? About Lily and the diamonds? About whatever had happened in those woods in 1952? Mike studied his grandfather's headstone. Simple, dignified. Robert Wilson, 1930-2023, beloved husband, father, grandfather. Nothing to hint at the secrets that lay beneath. He glanced around to make sure he was alone, then knelt and ran his hands over the still fresh dirt of the grave. 6 feet down, according to Mrs. Winter's records, there was a concrete barrier. And beneath that, "What did you hide, Grandpa?" he whispered. On impulse, Mike took out his phone and opened the compass app. He wasn't sure why, just a feeling. He moved the phone slowly across the grave. When he reached the area near his grandfather's feet, the compass needle wavered and jumped. Metal. There was something metal buried down there. Mike sat back on his heels, heart pounding. He had no proof that his gentle, bird-watching grandfather had been a thief or had anything to do with Lily's possible death. But the evidence was mounting, and it all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. The only way to learn the truth was to do exactly what his grandfather's note had instructed. He needed to dig. That night, Mike researched grave excavation. What he was considering wasn't just disrespectful, it was illegal. Disturbing a grave could lead to serious criminal charges, but the alternative was letting his grandfather's secret stay buried, maybe forever. He made a list of what he would need: shovels, a pickaxe for the concrete, lights, a tarp to hide his activities. It would have to be at night when the cemetery was empty. He would need to work quickly and quietly, then restore everything so no one would know the grave had been disturbed. As Mike closed his laptop, his phone buzzed with a text. It was from his cousin Pete. "Got a weird call about Grandpa today. Someone asking if he left anything behind. Mom got one too. What's going on?" Mike stared at the message. Whoever was looking for his grandfather's secret was getting desperate. Contacting the whole family. Time was running out. He texted back, "Not sure. Talk tomorrow." But Mike knew he couldn't wait for tomorrow. Tonight, under cover of darkness, he would unearth his grandfather's grave and discover what lay beneath, before whoever was searching for the diamonds found them first. He looked out his window at the setting sun. In a few hours, the cemetery would be empty and dark, and Mike would commit an act he never could have imagined, digging up his own grandfather's grave to uncover the truth that had been buried with him. The digital clock on Mike's dashboard read 11:47 p.m. when he killed the headlights and coasted into the gravel parking lot of Hillside Cemetery. He'd driven past twice already, making sure the place was deserted. The old iron gates stood open. They never closed them these days, not since vandals had broken the lock last summer and the cemetery board decided it wasn't worth replacing. Mike sat in his car for several minutes, listening to the tick of the cooling engine and trying to calm his racing heart. What he was about to do felt wrong on every level. Disturbing the dead, breaking the law, disrespecting his grandfather's remains. And yet, if he was right, his grandfather had left something for him to find. "The truth lies beneath. Find it before they do." Those words had been meant for Mike, a message from beyond the grave. He popped the trunk and began gathering his supplies. 2 shovels, one regular, one smaller for more careful digging. A pickaxe to break through the concrete barrier. A battery-powered lantern. A blue tarp big enough to cover the gravesite and hide what he was doing from any passing cars. Work gloves, a bottle of water, and most important, a small pup tent. The tent had been his most brilliant idea. If anyone did happen to drive by, they'd see what looked like a homeless person camping out. Weird, but not nearly as suspicious as a man digging up a grave in the middle of the night. Mike shouldered his backpack, grabbed the shovels and pickaxe in one hand and the folded tarp in the other, and began the walk to his grandfather's grave. The cemetery was eerily quiet. During the day, birds sang in the old oak trees and groundskeepers trimmed the grass with roaring mowers. Now there was nothing but the soft crunch of gravel under his boots and the distant hum of traffic from the highway. The moon was just a sliver in the sky, which was both good and bad. Good because the darkness would help hide what he was doing. Bad because he'd have to rely on his lantern, which might attract attention. He'd solved that problem by bringing a small camping light that could be dimmed and pointed downward. His grandfather's grave was on the east side of the cemetery, beneath a spreading maple tree. Mike found it easily enough, even in the darkness. The earth was still slightly mounded, the grass not yet fully grown over the disturbed soil. 3 months wasn't long in the life of a grave. Mike set down his tools and spread the tarp over the grave, anchoring it with rocks at the corners. Then he crawled underneath with his lantern and tools. The blue plastic created a dim, underwater-like space. He positioned the lantern and took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," he whispered, "but I need to know." Then he began to dig. The work was harder than he'd expected. Though the soil had been disturbed relatively recently, it was still densely packed. Every shovelful felt like a betrayal, but Mike forced himself to continue. Sweat soon soaked through his shirt despite the cool night air. After an hour, his shoulders ached and his hands, despite the gloves, were developing blisters. He'd created a hole about 3 feet deep and 4 feet wide, large enough for him to stand in. He paused to drink some water and check his phone. No messages. No one had noticed he was missing yet. He resumed digging, more carefully now. According to the cemetery records, the concrete barrier would be at 6 feet. He didn't want to damage it with careless shovel work. The deeper he dug, the more claustrophobic the space beneath the tarp became. The air grew stale and thick with the smell of earth. Near the 5-foot mark, Mike's shovel struck something hard. He froze, then carefully scraped away soil with the smaller shovel. It was concrete, just as the records had indicated. His grandfather had installed a barrier above his casket. But why? Mike worked more methodically now, clearing soil from the concrete slab. It appeared to be about 4 feet wide by 7 feet long, large enough to cover a casket, with some room to spare. What had his grandfather hidden beneath it? He took the pickaxe and, with careful measured strikes, began to break through the concrete. It was surprisingly thin, cracking easily under the pointed tip of the pickaxe. Within minutes, he'd created a hole large enough to see through. Mike shone his lantern into the gap. Instead of soil, he saw empty space, a void beneath the concrete. His heart raced. His grandfather had created a secret chamber within his grave, just as Mike had suspected. He widened the hole, breaking away chunks of concrete until he could fit his shoulders through. Then he lay on his stomach and lowered the lantern into the void. What he saw made his breath catch. About 3 feet below the concrete barrier was his grandfather's casket, just as it should be, but beside it, wedged into a carefully constructed hollow in the earthen wall, was a metal box about the size of a small toolbox. It was secured with a combination lock. "The diamonds," Mike whispered. He needed to get down there. The hole was just big enough for him to squeeze through if he went feet first. Lowering himself carefully, Mike dropped into the chamber beside his grandfather's casket. The space was tight, the air stale and cold. He tried not to look at the casket itself, focusing instead on the metal box. With trembling hands, he pulled it from its niche. It was heavier than he'd expected, the metal cool to the touch. The combination lock was old-fashioned with 3 numbered wheels. Mike stared at it, trying to think. What would his grandfather have used as the combination? The date on the photo, 1952. He tried it. 1952. The lock didn't budge. Maybe individual digits? 195. Nothing. Then it hit him. The month and year, July 1952, when the jewelry heist had happened. 752, the lock clicked open. Mike's hands shook so badly he almost dropped the box. This was it, the secret his grandfather had taken to his grave, the truth that lay beneath. Whatever was inside would either clear his grandfather's name or confirm his darkest suspicions. Before he could open it, a sound froze him in place. Car tires on gravel. Someone had pulled into the cemetery parking lot. Mike quickly closed the box and tucked it into his backpack. He had to get out of here. Now. Hoisting himself up through the hole in the concrete was harder than dropping. Down had been. His shoulders scraped against the rough edges, and for one terrifying moment he thought he might be stuck. With a final heave, he pulled himself free. He could hear footsteps now, someone walking along the gravel path toward the section where he was. There was no time to refill the grave or even to pack up properly. Mike grabbed his backpack with the metal box inside and scrambled out from under. The tarp. The tent. He had to make it look like he was just camping. With frantic speed, he unfolded the small pup tent and threw his shovel and pickaxe inside. Then he crawled in after them, zipping the tent closed just as a beam of light swept across the cemetery. Through the thin fabric of the tent, Mike could see the bobbing glow of a flashlight. Someone was walking among the graves, checking them. A security guard? A groundskeeper? Or someone else looking for what his grandfather had hidden? The footsteps came closer. Mike held his breath, trying to be as still and silent as possible. The light paused nearby. Too nearby. It was shining directly on his grandfather's grave, illuminating the tarp and the freshly disturbed earth around it. "Hey!" a man's voice called out. "What's going on over there?" Mike's mind raced. He could run for it, but his car was the only one in the parking lot. They'd get his license plate for sure. He could stay hidden and hope they'd think it was just kids playing a prank. Or he could confront them directly. Before he could decide, the tent zipper was yanked open from outside. Mike found himself staring up at a middle-aged man in a security uniform, flashlight pointed directly at his face. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" the guard demanded. Mike blinked against the light, mind scrambling for a story. I was just... The guard's eyes moved past him to the shovel and pickaxe, then to the disturbed grave site with its blue tarp. His face hardened. Grave robbing? "Are you kidding me?" He pulled out a phone. "I'm calling the police." "Wait," Mike said desperately. "It's not what it looks like. That's my grandfather's grave." The guard paused, finger hovering over his phone. "Your grandfather?" "Robert Wilson. He died 3 months ago. I can prove it." Mike fumbled for his wallet, pulled out his driver's license. "See? Michael Wilson. He was my grandfather." The guard looked at the license, then at the headstone, partially visible beside the tarp. "That doesn't explain why you're digging him up in the middle of the night." Mike took a deep breath. The truth, or part of it, was his only way out. "He left a message for me, told me to find something he'd hidden." Mike patted his backpack. "I found it. I was going to fill everything back in, I swear. No one would have known." The guard stared at him for a long moment. "You expect me to believe that? Call my mother if you want. She can confirm he was my grandfather." Mike silently prayed the guard wouldn't take him up on that offer. His mother would be horrified. After what felt like an eternity, the guard lowered his phone. "Fill it in, now. And if I ever catch you in here after hours again, I won't be so understanding." Relief flooded through Mike. "Thank you. I will, I promise." Under the watchful eye of the security guard, Mike spent the next hour refilling the grave, packing down the soil as best he could. His shoulders screamed with pain, but he didn't dare complain. The whole time he was acutely aware of the metal box in his backpack, just feet away from the guard. What was inside? The missing diamonds? Proof of his grandfather's involvement in Lily's death, or something else entirely? He would have to wait until he got home to find out. But one thing was certain. Whatever his grandfather had hidden in that box had been important enough to take to his grave, and important enough for Mike to risk everything to unearth it. Mike's hands trembled as he placed the metal box on his kitchen table. It was nearly 4 a.m. His clothes were filthy, his muscles ached from digging, and his mind raced with questions. The security guard's flashlight beam still seemed to burn in his vision every time he closed his eyes. He'd driven home from the cemetery with the box beside him on the passenger seat, fighting the urge to pull over and open it right there on the side of the road, but no, this moment deserved privacy and respect. Whatever his grandfather had hidden, whatever truth lay inside that box, Mike needed to face it in the quiet of his own home. He went to the bathroom first and washed his hands, scrubbing the cemetery dirt from beneath his fingernails. When he caught sight of himself in the mirror, he barely recognized the wild-eyed, dirt-smudged man staring back at him. Was this what obsession looked like? Had his grandfather worn the same expression when he buried those diamonds all those years ago? If there were diamonds at all. Mike still wasn't certain what he would find inside the box. Back in the kitchen, Mike made a cup of strong coffee, then sat down at the table. The metal box sat before him, its combination lock hanging open. The metal was old but not rusted, as if it had been carefully preserved before being sealed in that underground chamber. "Okay, Grandpa," Mike whispered. "Let's see what you wanted me to find." He lifted the lid. Inside lay several items, each one carefully wrapped in cloth or plastic. Mike removed them one by one, placing them on the table. A small leather pouch, a stack of yellowed envelopes tied with string, a thin notebook, a newspaper clipping, and at the bottom, a small velvet jewelry box. Mike started with the leather pouch. It was tied with a leather cord, which he carefully untied. Inside, nestled against dark fabric, were rough, uncut diamonds, at least a dozen of them, ranging in size from a pea to a small marble. Even unpolished, they caught the kitchen light and threw it back in faint sparkles. "Oh, Grandpa," Mike breathed. "You really did it?" The jewels were beautiful but troubling. They were physical proof that his grandfather had indeed been the thief who'd robbed Watson's fine jewelry back in 1952. The gentle old man who'd taught Mike to fish, who'd built birdhouses in his workshop, who'd read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. That man had once been a thief. Mike set the diamonds aside and picked up the stack of envelopes. They were addressed to Robert Miller at a post office box in his grandfather's hometown. The return address was for someone named L. Chen, in the same town, Lily Chen, the woman from the photograph. Mike opened the first letter with care. The paper was brittle with age. Inside was a handwritten note in delicate flowing script. "My dearest Robert, last night feels like a dream. I keep touching the ring you gave me, though I can only wear it at home, as we agreed. Mother asked where I was until so late. I told her I was working, which isn't entirely a lie. Aren't we working toward our future together? 2 more months, and we'll have enough saved. Then we can leave this narrow-minded town behind and start fresh somewhere. No one knows us or cares that we're different. I've been practicing my French. Quebec might be just far enough. All my love." Lily Mike read the letter twice, then moved on to the next. It was similar, full of love and plans for a future together. The third was more specific about their escape. "The plan is coming together perfectly. Mr. Watson trusts you completely now. He mentioned the new shipment again today. Uncut stones, the most valuable kind because they can be cut to order and are harder to trace. I know you're nervous, my love, but this is our only chance. People like us, we have to make our own way in this world. No one will give us the life we deserve." Mike's stomach tightened. The letters painted a clear picture. His grandfather and Lily had planned the heist together. They were in love but facing prejudice because of their different backgrounds, a white man and a Chinese woman in 1950s small-town America. The jewelry heist had been their ticket to a new life together, but something had gone terribly wrong. Mike picked up the newspaper clipping next. It was the same article he'd found in his research about the unidentified woman's body found in the woods, but this copy had been carefully preserved, and his grandfather had written on it in faded blue ink, "My Lily. God forgive me." Cold dread settled in Mike's chest. Had his grandfather killed her? The man who'd taught him to always tell the truth, to be kind to everyone, to help those in need. Had that man taken a life? The thin notebook would hold the answers. Mike opened it with shaking hands and found his grandfather's handwriting filling the pages. It was a confession, written decades after the events it described. "I write this in my 60th year, knowing I am a coward for not confessing sooner. But I cannot go to my grave without leaving some record of the truth, even if no one ever reads it. Lily and I planned to steal the diamonds together. We were young and in love, and faced a world that had no place for us. The theft went exactly as planned. The night of July 16th, 1952, I took the uncut diamonds from Mr. Watson's safe and met Lily at our usual spot by the lake. We should have left town immediately, but Lily wanted to go back to her parents' house one last time, to leave a note explaining her disappearance. I waited in the car while she went inside. When she returned, she was upset. Her father had seen the ring I'd given her, had guessed about us. Terrible things were said. We drove out of town, arguing about what to do next. Lily wanted to split up temporarily, to throw off suspicion. I feared we'd never find each other again. At the overlook above Miller's Creek, we stopped to talk. The argument grew heated. I didn't mean to grab her so roughly. She stepped back, lost her footing on the loose gravel at the edge. I reached for her, but it happened so fast. I watched her fall. I still hear in my nightmares the sound when she hit the rocks below. Mike had to stop reading for a moment. He got up and poured himself another cup of coffee, trying to steady his nerves. His grandfather hadn't murdered Lily deliberately. It had been an accident, a terrible, tragic accident. But what he'd done afterward? He returned to the notebook. I climbed down to her. She was still breathing, but barely. Her eyes opened once, looked at me with such confusion, such hurt. Then she was gone. I should have called for help. I should have carried her body into town, confessed everything. Instead, I panicked. The diamonds were in the car. Everyone would assume I'd killed her for them. No one would believe it was an accident. So I hid her body in the woods where I knew it would eventually be found. I took the diamonds and drove west. I didn't stop until I reached Colorado. I changed my name, found work as a janitor. For months I expected the police to find me, but they never did. 3 years later, I met Helen. She saved me in every way a person can be saved. I never told her about Lily or the diamonds. How could I? The man she loved didn't exist. The diamonds remained hidden all these years. I couldn't sell them without raising questions. I couldn't throw them away. They were purchased with Lily's life, so they stayed with me, a constant reminder of my greatest sin. I've tried to be a good man since then, a good husband, father, grandfather. I've given anonymously to charities, especially those helping young Chinese American women. I've lived honestly in all other ways, but nothing can erase what I did, or failed to do, that night at Miller's Creek. If anyone ever reads this, know that I am sorry, so deeply, completely sorry, not just for Lily's death, but for my cowardice afterward, for the life we never got to live, for the truth I've hidden all these years. Mike closed the notebook, tears blurring his vision. It was all there, the full, terrible truth. His grandfather hadn't been a murderer, but he'd let fear and panic lead him to abandon the woman he loved and run from what he'd done. The last item from the box was the small velvet jewelry case. Mike opened it and found a simple gold ring with a tiny diamond. Inside the band was an inscription, R and L forever, the engagement ring his grandfather had given Lily, the ring she could only wear at home because of what people would think. Mike sat at his kitchen table as dawn light began to filter through the windows, surrounded by the fragments of his grandfather's secret life, the diamonds, the letters, the confession, the ring. What was he supposed to do with it all? The diamonds should be returned to their rightful owner, if Watson's fine jewelry still existed, or to their insurance company. The truth about Lily deserved to be known, her body properly identified if possible, though it might be too late for that. But revealing everything would destroy his grandfather's reputation, devastate his family. His mother, his aunts and uncles, his cousins, they all cherished their memories of Robert Wilson, the kind, gentle family man. How would they feel knowing he had been Robert Miller, thief and fugitive, a man who had hidden a woman's death for over 70 years? And then there was the person who had been asking questions, calling family members about anything his grandfather might have left behind. Who were they? What did they know? Were they after the diamonds or something else? As the first rays of sunlight touched the diamonds on his kitchen table, making them sparkle with inner fire, Mike realized he was now the keeper of his grandfather's secret. The decision about what to do with the truth, all of it, was his to make. Mike didn't remember falling asleep, but he woke with his head on the kitchen table, the morning sun warm on his face. For a moment he was confused. Why was he in the kitchen? Why did his back and shoulders hurt so much? Then he saw the metal box and its contents spread before him, and everything came rushing back. The grave, the diamonds, his grandfather's confession. He checked his phone. 10:17 a.m. 3 missed calls from his mother and a text from his cousin Pete. Mom, got another weird call. We need to talk. Mike rubbed his eyes and tried to think clearly. He needed a plan. But first he needed a shower and fresh clothes. He still smelled like cemetery dirt. 30 minutes later, feeling somewhat more human, Mike sat down with a fresh cup of coffee and began to sort through his options. He couldn't just ignore what he'd found. The diamonds alone were worth a small fortune, and they weren't his to keep. And then there was Lily. Didn't she deserve justice, even after all these years? But there was his family to consider. His mother, who had adored her father. His grandmother, who had lived her entire married life without knowing her husband's terrible secret. Was it right to destroy their memories of him? And who was this mysterious person asking questions about his grandfather? Someone who knew, or suspected, about the diamonds. Mike's phone rang again. His mother. He couldn't avoid her forever. Hey, Mom, he answered, trying to sound normal. Where have you been? I've been calling since yesterday. Her voice was tight with worry. Sorry, I was busy with something. Mike glanced at the items on his table. What's up? The calls are getting worse. Someone came to the house last night asking about your grandfather's possessions. When I wouldn't let them in, they threatened to come back. Mike sat up straight. Did you call the police? Yes, but what could they do? The person was gone by the time they arrived. She paused. Mike, what's going on? Does this have something to do with that photo you showed me? Mike closed his eyes. He couldn't tell her everything. Not yet, maybe. Not ever. But he needed to protect her. Maybe. Listen, Mom. I think you should stay with Aunt Beth for a few days just to be safe. Why? What aren't you telling me? I'll explain everything soon, I promise. Just trust me on this, okay? After some argument, she agreed. Mike called his aunt next and arranged for his mother to stay with her, claiming there was a plumbing issue at his mother's house. It wasn't much of a plan, but it would keep her safe while he figured out what to do. Next, he called Pete. Hey, can you meet me at Jimmy's diner in an hour? Sure, Pete said. Does this have something to do with those weird calls about Grandpa? Yeah, I'll explain when I see you. Mike carefully repacked everything into the metal box, except for the diamonds, which he put in a small plastic bag and tucked into his quiver pocket. He wasn't sure why, but he felt he should keep them close. At Jimmy's diner, Pete was already waiting in a booth near the back. He looked up from his coffee as Mike slid in across from him. You look terrible, Pete said by way of greeting, like you haven't slept. I haven't. Not really. Mike ordered coffee from a passing waitress, then leaned forward. What exactly did your mom say about the calls she got? Pete shrugged. Just that someone called asking if Grandpa had left anything unusual behind. Some kind of collection, they said. When she told them no, they got pushy, started asking about his personal papers, where he kept important documents, that kind of thing. Did they leave a name? Nope. Called from a blocked number, too. Mike nodded slowly. Same with my mom. Except last night someone actually showed up at her house. Pete's eyes widened. Seriously, that's messed up. Yeah. Mike hesitated, then decided to trust his cousin with at least part of the truth. Look, I found something. Something Grandpa left behind. What kind of something? Mike glanced around, to make sure no one was listening, then lowered his voice. I think it's what these people are looking for. It's valuable and complicated. Pete leaned forward. How valuable? Very. But it's not really ours to keep. Mike took a deep breath. Pete, did you ever think Grandpa might have secrets? I mean big ones from before he met Grandma. Pete's expression changed subtly. Everyone has secrets, Mike. Not like this. Mike studied his cousin. You know something, don't you? Pete was quiet for a long moment. Not exactly. But when I was a kid, maybe 12, I was helping Grandpa in his workshop. He'd been drinking a little. You know how he'd sometimes have a whiskey while he worked. And he started talking about mistakes, about how one bad choice could change your whole life. He said something about how he wasn't always the man we knew, that he'd done things he regretted. Did he mention Lily? Or diamonds? Pete's eyes snapped up. No, nothing specific. Just, wait, who's Lily? Mike realized he'd said too much. It's complicated, but I think Grandpa was involved in something back in the early 1950s before he met Grandma. Something illegal. And I think whoever's been calling the family knows about it. So, what do we do? I'm still figuring that out. Mike sipped his coffee. For now, make sure your mom is safe. Don't talk to any strangers about Grandpa and let me know if anything else happens. After lunch with Pete, Mike drove to the public library. He needed to use a computer that couldn't be traced back to him. He searched for information on Watson's fine jewelry, the store his grandfather had robbed in 1952. To his surprise, the store still existed, though it had moved to a larger city about 50 miles away. According to their website, it was now run by the grandson of the original owner. There was even a page about the store's history, including a brief mention of the infamous 1952 heist that had nearly bankrupted the original location. Mike wrote down the address and phone number. Then he searched for information on Lily Chen. This was harder. There were no digital records going back that far for someone who had effectively disappeared. But he did find a Chinese-American historical society in the state capital. They might have resources or at least advice on how to properly honor Lily's memory. Finally, Mike searched for lawyers who specialized in unusual cases. He would need legal advice for what he was planning. Back home, Mike sat down and wrote out a careful plan. First, he would take care of his mother's safety. Then he would deal with the diamonds and his grandfather's confession. Finally, he would try to find out who was looking for the diamonds and why. It took him 3 days to put everything in motion. He rented a safety deposit box at a bank across town and placed his grandfather's confession and Lily's letters inside. He made an appointment with a lawyer recommended by a legal aid website, and he prepared a package to send to Watson's fine jewelry, containing the diamonds and a carefully worded note explaining they had been recently discovered among a deceased relative's possessions. He kept the ring, though. Something told him Lily would have wanted him to have it. The mysterious caller continued to contact family members, growing increasingly aggressive. Mike's mother reported that someone had broken into her house while she was staying with his aunt. Nothing seemed to be missing, but drawers had been emptied and closets searched. The night before his appointment with the lawyer, Mike received a text from an unknown number. I know you found them. Let's talk. Tomorrow, noon, the cemetery. Mike stared at the message. How had they gotten his number? How did they know he'd found the diamonds and the cemetery? Was that a coincidence? Or did they somehow know he'd dug up his grandfather's grave? He thought about ignoring the message, but this might be his only chance to find out who was behind all this. He texted back, "Who are you?" The reply came seconds later. Someone who knew your grandfather's secret. Someone who's been waiting for those diamonds for a very long time. Mike's heart raced. Could it be someone connected to Lily? A relative, seeking justice after all these years? The next morning, Mike met with the lawyer, a gray-haired woman named Mrs. Patel who listened without judgment as he explained his situation, leaving out the part about digging up the grave. So you found these items among your grandfather's possessions, she said, clearly not believing him but professional enough not to press the issue. And you want to know the legal implications of returning stolen property after 70 years, and possibly reopening a case involving an accidental death. Yes, Mike said. Can it be done anonymously? I don't want to destroy my family's memories of him. Mrs. Patel tapped her pen against her notepad. The statute of limitations has long expired on the theft. As for the death, if it truly was an accident as your grandfather claimed, and if you have evidence of that, it might be possible to provide closure without criminal charges. But anonymous? That's trickier. She advised him to think carefully before proceeding, and to bring the materials to their next appointment for her to review. After leaving the lawyer's office, Mike drove to the cemetery. It was nearly noon. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he felt he owed it to his grandfather and to Lily to see this through to the end. He parked and walked slowly toward his grandfather's grave. From a distance, he could see someone already standing there, an elderly Asian woman leaning on a cane. As he approached, she turned to face him. "Michael Wilson?" she asked, her voice surprisingly strong for her apparent age. "Yes," Mike said cautiously. "Who are you?" The woman studied him with dark, intelligent eyes. "My name is Grace Chen. Lily. Chen was my aunt, my father's sister. I've been looking for answers about her disappearance for most of my life." Mike's breath caught. "How did you find me? How did you know about the diamonds?" Grace smiled sadly. "Your grandfather wasn't as careful as he thought. He sent money every year to our family, anonymous donations, but always on the anniversary of Lily's disappearance. My father suspected but could never prove it. Before he died, he asked me to keep looking." She gestured to the grave. "When I saw his obituary in the paper, I knew this might be my last chance to learn the truth. The diamonds were just a guess. Family stories mentioned Lily had been dating a jeweler's apprentice." Mike stood silent, processing this. Finally, he asked, "What do you want?" "The truth," Grace said simply. "Not the diamonds, though they rightfully belong to the Watson family. Just the truth about what happened to my aunt. My father went to his grave wondering." Mike thought of the confession in his safety deposit box, of the pain and remorse his grandfather had carried for 70 years. "Of Lily, who deserved to be remembered. I can give you that," he said, "and more." As they walked slowly away from the grave, Mike began to tell Grace about the letter he'd received, about his search for answers, about what he'd found. With each word, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. His grandfather had kept his secret for 70 years, but now the truth was finally coming to light, not to punish, but to heal, to remember, to honor both the man his grandfather had become and the woman who had been lost. The legacy of truth, Mike realized, was more valuable than any diamond.